Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. I'm your host, Zach, and tonight we are going to do something a little different. Joining me doesn't want to be on camera, but you'll hear her disembodied voice, is the lovely Amanda. And we are going to be looking at the political spectrum. I am a social studies teacher, and we had just recently been teaching political science to our students. And looking around, I wanted to find something that would cover the political spectrum in an honest and just very straightforward way without a whole lot of agenda or bias. Um, and I couldn't find that, so I made it myself. It's taken me a number of months to put this all together. I've done a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of getting into the information to find what I consider to be the most honest, at the very least, political spectrum that I can put together. And we're going to go through it piece by piece. Tonight, we're going to start with the introduction, just get some things out of the way, define some terms, and then we'll get at least into monarchy tonight. I don't know how long it's going to go, but basically, I'm just going to give you a presentation. And Amanda, if you have any questions, just pop right in. And if any of you viewing have any questions, let me know as well, because I want to give as much space to the presentation itself. I'm not going to have the chat overlay up on screen, but if you make a comment and I want to respond to you, I will highlight it and it will pop up on the main screen. So that's how that's going to work.
So you don't want much commentary.
You can give commentary. That's totally fine. I'm just saying for people that write comments from wherever they are watching, it's not going to show up on the screen. That's the main difference, because usually it shows up on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and share this presentation in a few places, and then we will get into it.
I'm going to need to check in.
Yeah, why don't we start with our check-in? This is how I like to start all of my classes. I find all these weird ones on Pinterest, and it's just a good way to kind of check in with everybody, check in with yourself, see what sort of a mood you're in. Today, I think I'm going to go with Squidward number 2. Man, it's been a roller coaster. Between thinking that my student loans are going to all be canceled and I'd have to drop out of grad school, to finding that hopefully they've been saved, though there's no guarantee of how long. At least a judge has stayed that executive order for now. To just the constant turmoil, the constant shock. This is the way that they like things with the current administration. So it's been a roller coaster. So yeah, I'm going to check in as number 2. I'm ready to hopefully move on to better things. How about you, Amanda? Which one would you select for tonight?
I'm feeling number 6.
Okay.
Because I've been having a lot of snacks today, but I'm also feeling really worried about things that are going on around me. So it's hard.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of just whiplash, really. It's someone brought up that it's kind of like the shock doctrine, where they just throw so many things at you all at once that you don't really have time to properly process or respond to anything before there's something new. So
it's like when the fire starts to burn,
right?
And it starts to spread.
I'm not gonna deal with that.
She's gonna take her attitude home. They ain't gonna do nothing with their life.
Yep. So that is where we're at. So we can see on our left side. Oh, I haven't pulled it up yet. I haven't pulled anything up yet. So you guys are like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah.
Here's the presentation. So this is the Squidward we're talking about. What Squidward are you today? And I've chosen
Share
number 2.
in the chat. Which Squidward are you?
Yeah. Type in the chat if you'd like to be recognized for your choice.
Yeah. Choices are important. Even though we don't have many anymore, we still value the choices you would like to make.
Indeed.
Hashtag number 6. Hashtag snacks and panic.
Snacks and panic?
Yeah.
I kind of like that. That's a good way to put it.
If you feel extra
All right.
scared, crunchy.
Crunchy.
Go crunchy.
So yeah, so now you should be able to see the agenda. So we did our check-in. We're going to start with the political spectrum part 1, just with the basics. What is the political spectrum? Why is it important? Where do things fit in? And then we will get into when monarchs ruled the world. Perhaps we'll even get into part 3, but we'll see how much time we have and how fast we go, how many questions we got. Hold on. So here is one version of someone's political spectrum. We have the basic left versus right versus center, and different ideologies that they believe fall within each one. So we'll just kind of use this as our baseline, and we'll kind of, as we go along, see how much it checks out with what we decide. Now, if I was presenting this as a class, we would start by watching this very basic introduction to what political ideology means, and also what the political spectrum means. But in the interest of just getting along with things, I'm not going to be playing all the videos. Otherwise, it would take many times more than one night to cover all of this.
Bipartisanship is not just for the congressroom boy.
But I do plan on posting this entire presentation somewhere. I'll leave it in the notes when I figure out where I can park it, where you'll be able to download and browse at your leisure. This is just kind of the guided version of it. All right, first some important definitions. Also, by the way, I'll be reading all of the text on the screen. I know that annoys some people when you read the entire PowerPoint, but I do want to make this accessible to as many people as possible. So those with visual impairments, I'm going to go ahead and read every word that's on the screen. So anyway, important definitions. The first one being descriptive versus prescriptive language. Now, descriptive language paints a picture of what or how something is, what someone said, and what someone believes. In contrast, prescriptive language tells you what something should be. If what someone said is good or bad, it makes a value judgment, and what you should believe. So during these presentations, I plan on using only descriptive language. We're trying to figure out the what of things. And it's really going to be up to you. I'm going to give you as much information and resources to make up your own mind as possible, but it's going to be up to you ultimately to decide. So I'm not going to try. So this presentation will tell you what things are, what people said or believe, and what happened. It will not tell you how to feel about any idea, what you should believe, or whether or not an event, person, or idea is good or bad. That means it's up to you to decide how you feel and what you believe. You may have heard of political ideas being left, right, or center, but what do those terms mean? Let's define some of that. So left and right came from the French Revolution in 1789. Politicians that were loyal to the king sat on the right side in the National Assembly, which is a lot like, and I should also mention, I'm presenting this from an American perspective. That is where I've lived my entire life. That's where I have the best perspective. So when I say things like our Congress, that's what I'm referring to, the U.S. Congress. So anyway, those who supported the king and were loyal sat on the right side of the National Assembly. Those that wanted revolution and change sat on the left side. And those terms just kind of stuck. Today in the US, we usually say that liberals or progressives are on the left because they too want change, much like the revolutionaries of the time in France. And then we say conservatives are on the right because they want to more or less keep things as they are. They are loyal to the present and the current configuration of things. How are we doing so far?
Yeah.
Good. Cool. So let's take a closer look at the political spectrum itself and decide for ourselves what seems best for each of these. So these are all the spots that we are going to visit along the way. The common themes that you'll see as we go, as we move from left to right, are hierarchy decreases, That's a very important one. That's a lot of what I've based this spectrum on. Some individual rights for the upper classes also decrease, and collective rights tend to increase. But let's define some more terms. Hierarchy means a system or organization in which people or groups are ranked one above the other according to their status or authority. That's from the Oxford Dictionary. I think that's a fine definition of it. Most businesses are structured as a hierarchy, a very strict hierarchy. The owner at the top making decisions, managers in the middle carrying out those decisions, and regular employees at the bottom following those decisions. Governments also tend to be hierarchical. Usually the federal government of a particular nation makes decisions that affect the entire nation overall and has some or total control over the local state or province and local governments. Individual rights are the rights that people have to pursue their lives and goals without interference from the government or the people. In the US, these rights include things like freedom of speech, the right to own a firearm, and the right to a fair trial. For those at the top of society who control businesses and politics, individual rights include rights to exert power over others, in one way or another. Okay, collective rights, on the other hand, are human rights that protect groups of people and their environment. Anti-discrimination laws are an example of a collective right. They protect an entire class of people that are often vulnerable in one way or another. Pollution laws are another example. They protect everyone all together. So here's our basic spectrum. We have the left, we have the right. Above the line, we are going to put the forms of government. Below the line, we will put the forms of economy. And we will see how these two forms are related and, in fact, often dependent and feed into one another. We will start with the rightmost edge over on this gray dot here, and we're going to move our way leftward, and that will make sense in a minute. All right, we are already up to part 2, when monarchs ruled the world. So we have some famous, well, I guess the first one is not a famous painting, it's just an illustration of some pharaohs in Egypt. And on the right side, we have, I can't remember who this painting is. I think there might be a link to
Henry
it.
VIII.
Henry VIII? Okay. Gotcha. Oh,
Yeah.
shoot. And now I've lost. There we go. Yeah, I believe you're right with Henry VIII there. Thank you, art history major.
Not art history, just
art major, excuse me. Well, you took art history, though.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
It cost me a lot of money, a lot of pain.
Hey there, Crystal. Yep, we're on to number 2, part 2. Monarchs rule the world.
And Jeannie.
She hasn't said anything yet, so.
Well, we
tend not to mention people unless they make comments. Some people just like to sit and watch. So here's our first stop, and it's illustrated in orange. That would be an absolute monarchy. Remember, we have the form of government at top and a mostly slave economy. So right on this band here, monarchy and slave. And you'll see that monarchy extends well beyond the slave economy. That will make sense later on. In ancient Egypt, and I have links to the various breakdowns of the higher order, the hierarchy, and their orders. Ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome are good examples of absolute monarchies with a mostly slave economy. Hey, Jeannie, how's it going? So here we can see any of these are good examples. We'll just take the Roman Empire, for example. So the senators and administrators. Now, sometimes this would be the Caesar at the top of the Roman Empire. Below that would be nobles. Then we have plebeians or plebs, freedmen, and at the very bottom, slaves. But basically, this is our power hierarchy. And you'll notice that at the top of the pyramid, there's much less room. So in the case of Egypt, there's only one pharaoh. I guess there was a time when there was two pharaohs, but eventually the northern and southern kingdoms were united under one pharaoh. Beneath them, government officials, nobles, priests, basically their aristocracy. The soldiers, the scribes, merchants beneath that, craftsmen, and at the bottom, farmers and slaves. In an absolute monarchy, the king, queen, pharaoh, emperor, monarch, whatever you want to call it, the supreme leader, sits at the very top of the power hierarchy. These are the sorts of people that statues and paintings are made of, especially from classical times, because they had a lot of importance. Whether or not those earned or not, I'll leave that to you to decide. So let's do some defining of absolute monarchy. So a single ruler has unlimited power to conduct all of the functions of government. There are no laws or constitutional constraints, or no laws or constitution constrains them. Power is transferred hereditarily. So that's from the father or the mother to usually their offspring. There could be complicated series of heredity, but it's usually the closest family member who gets the power next. So when the monarch dies, a relative becomes the new monarch. Typically, it is the eldest son, but sometimes the spouse takes over, or there's other rules, depending on the monarchy we're talking about. There are several classes beneath the monarch and the royal family. We will look at them next. I have a little side video here that just goes further to explore what it means to be a monarchy. What's up? Okay. All right, moving along. Underneath the monarch was the noble or aristocratic class. I have a link here that explains more about the aristocracy. Those were the wealthy people with titles and lands, as well as high-ranking members of the state religion. They were given their title like duke, countess, lord, high priest, etc., and given lands to control by the monarch. The monarch hands it to them. They get to do with it basically as they please. They're a little bit like a mini monarch for that tiny little fiefdom that they own. These positions were also largely hereditary, so they didn't want to share power with just anybody. You had to be born to the right family in order to be worthy of it in their eyes. Nobility class continued. They managed the merchants and peasants and slaves beneath them and extracted taxes in the form of money and or goods from them. In return for their power, they were expected to protect the monarch by raising armies for him or her, mostly from the peasants and slaves, but also from their own noble families at times, and giving a portion of the taxes as tribute to the monarch. Okay, so this noble class, this aristocracy, got their money just by owning land. So they're basically the original landlords. In fact, that's where landlord comes from. It is a vestige from the feudal era. It's people that make their money by owning land, which they then get rent from. No different in that time. They got rent from the peasants that worked the land. They would take a portion of their crop. They would take some of their labor in other ways. They would take their labor during wartime, or they would take just money, in places where currency became more popular as the way to keep tally. Nobles had many more rights than the lower classes, though not as many as the monarch. Okay, so just because you're the Duke of so-and-so doesn't mean that the king can't come and just say, yeah, I really don't like your family anymore. I'm going to strip you of your power, or, take your head from you. And that's that. And there's nothing really that anyone can do unless they revolt. Underneath the nobility or aristocracy was the merchant class of merchants, artisans, and artists. Merchants were just the business people, bankers, shop owners, traders, the people that financed expeditions, the people that owned the various shops in a given village or city. Artisans were the people who were skilled at a trade, like a blacksmith, a carpenter, a rug weaver. Artists would include, of course, things like painters, sculptors, actors, musicians. These were more or less self-employed. They may have a system of patronage or whatever, where people would just, wealthy people would pay to keep them employed, more or less, like a Michelangelo or, you know, any of the classic masters. In ancient times, the merchant class had much fewer rights than the upper classes. So these were not nobility. They may be wealthy, but they didn't have the title and they didn't have the same rights as the nobility. But that would change in time, as we will see. Below that merchant class were the peasant class and the slave class at the very bottom. These have historically been farmers and pastoralists, that is to say, livestock keepers and herders. There's little to no chance for peasants to move up into different class, and they had few rights. There's virtually no chance for slaves to ever be anything other than slaves. This class had very few individual or collective rights. It too was mostly hereditary, but not because a title was passed down from generation to generation, more because by being born into a particular serfdom, you now are also a serf or a peasant on the noble's land. So there would be times when, like, maybe they would distinguish themselves in battle and be given some land or a title, or I suppose just do some great work for a noble person or a king or queen. They might be able to move up. If they really worked at it, maybe they could go work for a merchant in a village or a town. But for the most part, if you're born a peasant, you stay a peasant, and you basically are tied to the land that you're on. All right, as the Roman Empire fell, slave economies gave way to feudal economies. This is a famous painting of the fall of Rome. People trying to flee the city burning, being sacked by invaders. We're just going to move on, though. So after slavery faded, there goes that very bottom class of slaves, of course. Now we're down to four classes. We have the monarch at the top, we still have the aristocratic class, the merchant class, and the peasant class. Who is the new bottom? So let's return to the spectrum. In orange, the new orange band, we have an absolute monarchy with a mostly feudal economy. So most of the money is coming from the peasants' labor on the land, making raw goods, which are then made into things for trade or just traded as raw goods. That's how kingdoms derive their wealth. They'd also, work in mines, do other stuff producing mostly. It's a very producer-oriented economy rather than a service economy like we have in the US right now. With the rise of feudalism and the fading of slavery, hierarchy decreased. Feudal monarchies are what we usually think of when we think of monarchies. The kings and queens of like Arthurian legend, that sort of thing. Knights of the Round Table, all that sort of thing. But there were also feudal monarchies in Japan, China, India, Mesoamerica, which is Central America, South America, and more. With the dissolving of the slave class, the exception, of course, being, or the big exception being later on during the transatlantic slave trade, society became less hierarchical just by default. The average rights of people went up when there's no longer a class that had absolutely no rights. So here we have a map of early trade routes, the rise of feudalism, and the seeds of its own downfall. More people had more collective rights. Wealthy elites had less individual rights because it was much less common to own slaves. In fact, it would be made illegal in many places. Still, people did not move much between classes. Things were pretty well rigid. Economies were driven mostly by peasants working lands though increasingly by trade. And this link here is to see. Whoops. This is I believe is a video that goes into more of the daily life of medieval peasants. Interested in that. Eventually, trade became so powerful that the merchant class began to reach the same level as monarchies, and early capitalism took root in the form of mercantilism. Now, this wasn't exactly like our current form of capitalism. There were not completely private enterprises. Monarchs' power decreased significantly as the merchant class grew in its power. Business was still mostly financed and controlled by the monarchs and their nobles. However, eventually this newly powerful merchant class would come to dominate monarchy and subdue its power almost entirely, and in some cases entirely, as we will soon see. So because these new merchants were, sailing around the world with their goods of various types, and then the economy was shifting away from just producing to now trade. Trade became the new form of economic power. Whatever country could trade the most would end up having the most riches and the most power, able to raise the biggest armies, able to provide the most for their people. So a big thing became having a trade imbalance. You wanted to bring in more money than was going out the door, and that's eventually how wealth was amassed. So we've arrived at yet another segment of the spectrum. In orange, we have an absolute monarchy with a mostly capitalist or mercantile economy. That's that orange and band, or the band in orange. Excuse me. All right, so does that make sense now? How we're starting to see how economy and government are really intertwined. Basically, whatever government you have determines what sort of economies you can expect to see. It's not an absolute rule, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. During these times, if you had a monarchy, it was pretty certain that you'd be relying on trade as your main economic driver, rather than just production and agrarian pursuits. But anyway, we're into early capitalism. So now we've really shifted our economic mode of production. And as you can see, capitalism is a much larger band than feudalism and slavery, partly because of just how many different ways we're going to see it interact with forms of government. So over time, monarchies fell. This kind of goes into some more of the history of how those monarchies fell, or they were forced to accept constitutions and give power to the government. Constitutional monarchies are still around today, like the late Queen of England and the continuing royal family. That's a constitutional monarchy, but they tend to be mostly ceremonial. So they technically have the last say, and they're the highest court in the land, but they basically just go along with whatever the lower courts determine. There's very few times where they're going to ever intervene in government in any meaningful way. They still get millions upon millions of dollars or pounds, or I guess whatever currency you have. They get wealthy still just by being monarchs, even though it's largely ceremonial. So they don't even have the responsibility anymore. There's very little chance that anyone's going to invade the UK, for example, to try and overthrow their monarchy. If they were to invade, it would be to overthrow the secular government, the regular old parliament. So they get all this luxury lavished over them without any of the responsibility. And again, it is still hereditary. It just doesn't have the same power that it used to. All right, so Jeannie says, seems Queen is falling soon, as well as much drama with their family. Well, yeah, the Queen died not that many years ago now. So for the time being, we have, we don't have, but Great Britain, the UK has a king, and once that king goes, because he is in poor health, it will fall to his children. So it never really ends. Like you can be happy about the downfall of a monarch, but they're just replaced with another monarch unless you change the system entirely. So besides the constitutional monarchies that still exist, there are a few absolute monarchies that have survived, such as the Saudi royal family. This is a legitimate head of state royal family, legitimate in the sense that it is recognized as a sovereign nation, and they are recognized as the head of that state. And they have very strict control over all of government. All right, we're coming to the end of our monarchy section. So here's some pros and cons. And once again, I'm trying to be honest about this. I'm not trying to say, well, obviously it's only pros or only cons or whatever. Trying to give an honest assessment of things. So I go by what people say about it in the pro and the con column, and I look for at least sound arguments from one point of view or another. So we'll start with the pros. There's the perception of stability. You know, you have one family that's watching over the country generation after generation. There's no volatile back and forth of power like we would see in the US, where the Democrats have control, then the Republicans have control, and it goes completely the other direction. And the Democrats get it again, and things go back in that direction, back and forth, back and forth. No, you have one continuous line of succession, and more or less they're going to have all the same interests in mind. They want to preserve their monarchy, they want to aggrandize their legacy, and they want to keep being rich, basically, and powerful. There's clear leadership. There's no question of, you know, like who is the most powerful person in the country. It's that guy or that lady. It's the person who sits on the throne and looks down on everyone else and has the last say in every decision making. That also streamlines decision making. You know, instead of having to debate things all that much, they might listen to advisors. They may not, but they just get to make the final say. It falls to one person. It's a very streamlined approach. So, in certain respects, it could be an efficient way to look at it. But yeah, moving on. There's pageantry and tradition. People get really, you know, enraptured with the royals and what they're doing, and when they've walked their dog last, and oh, they had this faux pas at a gala, and this and that. They think, you know, there's TV shows made about it, and TV shows parroting TV shows, and TV shows that are, you know, historical fictions about it, and reimaginings. Like, there's a lot of romanticism around monarchy. Why? It's hard to say. Maybe people just look back and think it was a simpler time, or I mean, who knows, really? It's just people like to look at all the pomp and circumstance and pageantry of whatever the royal family is doing. And they have very fancy, lavish balls and stuff like that. So some people see them as aspirational figureheads, maybe that they're not ever going to be a king or a queen, but that they're someone to look up to morally. You know, they can set the moral agenda. You know, they have a lot of power over. There's often a favored religion that goes along with an absolute monarchy. Those two usually, you know, prop each other up in one way or another. You have the religion saying how great it is to have the king. You have the king saying how wonderful it is to have the current head of the religion. So they are intertwined often. As I said, quick decision making. You know, you don't have to sit and deliberate. You don't have to consider everyone's opinion. You just say, king, queen, what are we doing? That's what you do. There's predictability of your station in life. So if there's no class mobility, you're never going to move on up or move on down. Like, no matter what you do, you can pretty well predict how your life is going to go and plan accordingly. There's not the uncertainty of, you know, if you go this route and you get a college degree, are you gonna be able to get the kind of job you want? And, you know, are you going to file for bankruptcy and lose all your money? Or, you know, all these they're pretty much laid out for you, your station in life. Some people see that as a plus. They can marshal large forces very quickly for war or large projects. That's part of that quick decision making. You know, the monarch snaps their fingers and people go to war for better or worse, for good or bad reasons. Some of the cons, though, there's a lot of murder and backstabbing plots around the line of succession. We're talking about in absolute monarchies. You don't really see that in constitutional monarchies because everyone just kind of shares the wealth. There's no like, you know, Prince Andrew is not going to live the kind of lavish life that he was hoping for unless he usurps the current monarch. That stuff just kind of goes away with a constitutional monarchy. But in absolute monarchies, at least historically, there'd be a lot of plots because there's a lot at stake. And maybe you're maybe you have an illegitimate child with a monarch and you want them to take the throne because there's some rule that it has to be the eldest son, no matter if they are within a marriage or not. You know, look at Game of Thrones, which is a dramatized version of actual events, the War of the Roses, where monarchs were usurping each other left and right. Good monarchs can be succeeded by incompetent ones with no possibility of removal. Again, you know, Game of Thrones are a really good quick reference for you. They talked about how every time the Targaryens, right? Every time they take the throne, the gods roll the dice. I'm butchering the phrase, but basically, for them, it was a crapshoot whether or not you're going to get a mad king or an actual good and wise and fair and just ruler. And that was true in life too. If any of you have ever worked a job where, say, the boss's son or daughter works for the company, there's a good chance they're not as good as their parent is at whatever business it is. I know I've had that experience before. There's no difference with monarchs. You could get a really good, wise, you know, forward-thinking, even progressive sort of a ruler who wants to make good social reforms, you know, bring education and provide for all the people and stuff like that. And the person who just happens to be in line after them could be a complete narcissist. You know, Rome comes to mind with that too. When you have a number of different Caesars and leaders who just turned out to be really terrible people and ruled very poorly. So yeah, there's no way of removing them. Once they're in power, that's it. Basically, the only options are hope for some sort of assassination or revolt. Like if you're a peasant or anyone beneath the nobility, or even the nobility, that's about your options. Murder or rebellion, if you get a really bad one in. So there's also no accountability. There's, you know, obviously, the way things are set up, there's no laws that really govern them. They are the absolute power. They are a drain on government funds. They might love having lavish parties and mismanage the wealth accumulated by their nations. And again, there's nothing you can do about it. And they may overextend themselves and plunge your country into the brink of bankruptcy. Many people see them as obsolete remnants of the past. You know, they're kind of quaint and stuffy. They don't really serve a purpose anymore. They're just, you know, you might as well have a Disneyland sort of a situation where have them set up their own business and people can go pay a quarter and, you know, see the Queen speak or something like that. So why should we give? People say, why should we give all this money to them just so they can sit around and look down on us? They don't actually do anything. They're not responsible for anything. Maybe they do some charity work, and that certainly is a way that they boost their reputation. The current king of the UK, really big on environmental philanthropy, and there's a number of causes that he works on and gives a lot of money and time to. And so people sometimes just give him a pass, like, we give a lot of money, but then he gives a lot of it back, and that sort of thing. That is a way that people explain it away. So another con, there is no social and economic mobility. So if you are someone who just really is tired of being a peasant, if you see one more field that needs plowing, you're just going to die of boredom. Too bad. That's probably what you're going to be the rest of your life. There's not a lot of options for you. So you're locked in. Even if you're a merchant, you may want to expand beyond your station. You may want to venture into other things. Or if you're a great artist, you're locked into whatever you are, basically. And there's very little chance that you'll be anything else. And of course, there's wasteful wars fought for issues of personal pride and vengeance. Of course, it's not a necessarily historic example, but there was Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Is it really worth the life of one kidnapped, whatever she was? I don't even know what they would have called her. Is it worth throwing away the lives of thousands, hundreds of thousands of soldiers just to get back one person that you really just have to have in your life? You might say no, but if you're part of the army of that particular monarch, you got no choice. You got to go to war. And then lastly, of course, there's very little freedom for anyone below the aristocratic class. We've pretty well covered that. You are what you are. There's not a lot of chance. You might be a genius, You could be the next Tesla, like the actual Nikolai Tesla. But if you're a peasant, no one may ever know. Who's going to take you seriously if you're obviously born and meant to be the low caste? Probably no one. You may never even know it yourself. You may never have gotten the education to really explore your gifts. So there's that. A lot of very smart people or very otherwise gifted people who could share their gifts with the world are denied that option just through the lottery of where they're born, the random chance of the family they're born into. All right, I like to end each one just to give a little bit of a check to where the U.S. is with these concepts. So a very small minority, about 5% in the U.S., as of this Pew Research poll, that is where this goes, to a Pew poll, would want to live under a monarchy. Not that many, 5%. So, think of the 100 people you know best, maybe 5 of them, they'd be all right living under a monarchy. And that's any sort of positive sentiment. That could be just like they'd be all right with it. They'd really love it. You can check the link if you want a clearer breakdown once I give you the place to go find the presentation. I'll probably put it in the show notes once it's posted to YouTube. So if you're really keen on getting this presentation for yourself to check out all these links and videos, come back to this video, look for my YouTube channel. I will post the exact address. Actually, why don't I do it right now before we move on to the next one? Why does it make it so hard? Why do they make it so hard to share your channel? Here we go. Share channel. Here it comes in the chat right now. So wherever you're looking, hopefully it will show up for you. There you go. There's my YouTube channel. So look for that. You can find the live stream right now too. If you'd rather be on that live stream for whatever reason. Yeah. Otherwise, moving on. So what replaced monarchies? Here's a big hint for you. Take a second to look at that. Something tells me this is actually AI art that I happen to find, because I have no idea what those guys with hammers are doing. Some sort of big geared machine, and they seem to be hitting it. Doesn't seem to me that that's the sort of machine you'd be hitting, but maybe they're making sheet metal or something. Who knows? Maybe they're bending metal. I can't remember where I got this particular photo from. Then we have a bunch of stuffy mutton chopped men sitting around in their three-piece suits, just talking, not working, of course. Actually, no, this looks like this is the signature down there. Tilly. I'll have to find the source for this later on. All right, more on that next time. So our bonus question, well, actually, we're going to keep on going because it's only been an hour, so more on it this time. Our bonus question for this section, or questions, I should say, how would you feel if the U.S. became a monarchy? Would it be good, bad, both for the country? Think about it in broad terms, for the economy, for your place in life, for the general well-being of people. You can really only answer that yourself based on what you care about. I can't force you to care about, freedom or good economies or any number of causes. That has to be up to you. So based on your own criteria for what makes a good nation and a good people, would this be good, bad, or both? Why or why not? And where do you think you would fit in to an American monarchy? Also, bonus question, who then would make a good American monarch? If anybody, maybe nobody. It's kind of all up to you. I see a terrible in the chat. Okay. So there you go. That's the bonus question. Moving on. All right. Part 3, the rise of the capitalist class. So trade becomes the new king. As trade became the engine of economies rather than production, the newly empowered merchant or capitalist class started to demand more consideration from the monarchs. They demanded a new type of meeting. There's more reading on that if you follow this link here, to negotiate or parley with the monarchies. And this word parley is where the word parliament comes from. It was the meeting house where they would negotiate with the monarch. Now, this would start out to be the powerful people, it would still be the nobility. That's why in the UK there is still the House of Lords, people with actual official monarchical titles, as well as the House of Commons, which is where just any old politician is going to make decisions. But yeah, so more and more this would become the merchant class who are going to parley with the king, not just the aristocrat class. Friction leads to revolution. While the monarchies enjoyed the increased wealth flowing into their coffers from the global trade, they also resented having their authority threatened by the merchant/capitalist class. Eventually, the merchants tried to force constitutions onto the monarchs to limit and control their powers. And I should say this is also with the help of the aristocracy. It's not just the merchants. Love parlay, a pause, if you will. Sure thing. So we'll pause after I finish this last point here. So the monarch's unwillingness to give up even more power led to revolutions around the world, including the American Revolutionary War. Right? This was over undue reach and taxation from the tyrant King George of the time. That's what led to the Boston Tea Party, to protest tariffs. Tariffs. There's a word of the day. This is what eventually led to the revolution. These merchant class in the Americas were just sick of living under the thumb and having the resources drained by a bunch of nobles who did nothing for them. You know, they would be slow to send aid. They would tax them because they could, because what are you going to do? They just were not very nice to negotiate with from their point of view. And so they led a revolution. And we have the famous painting. I believe the original is quite large, like, I don't know, we're talking 20 feet across or something like that. I'd have to look it up. I believe I do have a link, in fact, to it. Each of these paintings are famous paintings from the Revolutionary War. This is finally the surrender of the British forces down here to the new colonies, or the colonists, the newly formed United States. And Washington's surprise attack, the battle that turned the tide in the war and eventually led to the Americans winning their freedom. Oh, parlay is a pause, kind of, right? I've never heard of parlay as a pause. There may be something to that. I haven't heard that before. Parlay usually just means negotiate. I'd have to look it up, what language that derives from, but that's how I've always understood it. Moving on. So where do these new governments fall on our political spectrum? Remember our political spectrum, that thing we're supposed to be checking out? The U.S. founding fathers would say, they would have you believe, that America was always a representative democracy. That's how it was set up in our Constitution. We have the three main bodies of government, the legislature, the judiciary, one of the most needlessly complicated words, judiciary, and the executive branch. Three branches of government. You'll learn that in any basic civics class, you know. So that's the president, the Supreme Court, and the Senate and House forming the legislature. But that depends on your, so are we a representative democracy? That depends on your standard for what qualifies as a representative democracy. Okay. And we have all the founding fathers of their time signing some documents. I think that was that the Declaration? I have a link to it, so if you'd like to, you can follow it yourself. What is a representative democracy? This links to a video that just kind of lays out what representative democracy is. A representative democracy is a political system in which citizens of a country, it should say all vote, instead it says or vote, but it should say all vote for representatives to handle legislation and otherwise rule that country on their behalf. You have a representative, someone who represents your interests, in theory. The elected representatives are, in turn, accountable to the electorate for their actions. If that's the way it's supposed to go in theory. If you have a bad representative, you don't like your, whoever is your state senator or your local representative, you can vote them out. You can organize your neighbors to go vote them out, and that's it. So they have, in theory, an incentive to do good by you, to bring good things to your district, to make your lives easier in one way or another. We have a little graphic here that just shows the basic difference between what is known as a direct democracy and a representative democracy. So direct, pretty simple. People get together in an assembly, they make laws and rules. They form the legislature each individually. Think of it as though you had, say, a neighborhood council, but everybody showed up and everyone was able to vote on every matter before the council. Representative democracy. You vote for an elected representative. That person, in turn, makes laws and rules on your behalf. It's a professional politician who you select yourself. So again, where does the U.S. fall on the political spectrum? At the founding of the country, only white land-owning men could vote. And there's a good video. I believe this one links to a history of voting in America. Women, slaves, Native Americans, and working-class white men all had no representation and thus no say in how the government functioned. That is more than a majority of the country at the time. But you could say that that qualifies if your standard is that anyone has voting rights and representation. There is a more accurate term for this arrangement, though, as we will see, or in my opinion, a more accurate term. It wasn't until white women won the vote in 1920 that even half of Americans were allowed to vote. Before that time, not even half. 1920, a little more than 100 years ago, in a more than 200-year-old country. So you might say that then it qualified. If a majority of the people are allowed to have a say in their government, maybe that's your qualification for a democracy. Could be. You're allowed to have your own definition. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that people of all races could vote without impediments such as poll taxes and testing to prove that you were capable of voting and that sort of thing. So you might say at that point it finally qualifies, when there was not even those impediments. However, so we're continuing on with where does the USA fall on the political spectrum? Today in many states, people in prison and or who have been convicted of a felony are stripped of their right to vote. And this could be for their entire life. It depends on the state, what the rules are. We have over here on the right a graphic that breaks it down. In red, we have people with a felony conviction can vote upon completion of their sentence. You're able to get out of prison, you can vote right away. In the orange and red hashed or striped states, some people with a felony conviction cannot vote. In blue, people in prison cannot vote. Everyone else can vote. So as soon as you're out of prison, you can vote. Doesn't matter, I guess, what your conviction is. As soon as you're out of prison, you can vote. But just for that time that you're locked up, you can't. And in green, I believe just the two states here, everyone has the right to vote, whether or not you are in prison or not. So that could be your standard. If this were to change to an entirely green map where everyone can vote no matter what, maybe that's your standard for us finally having a representative democracy in the truest sense. Kind of depends on where you put the needle. Furthermore, people living in Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Marianas Islands. By the way, these are all U.S. territories, except for Washington, D.C., which is its own thing. But these are all more or less, they function as territories. Most people don't even know all the territories that the U.S. has. But again, that's Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, which are down in the Caribbean, American Samoa, way out in the Pacific, Guam, also way out in the Pacific, and as well as the Northern Marianas Islands, are all part of the U.S. Most of those people, although I believe American Samoa might be the exception, most of those people have birthright citizenship, meaning if they're born in these territories, they're U.S. citizens. I think there's something different about American Samoa, if I'm not mistaken. It could be one of the other territories, though. But they have no representation in Congress. That's the point. No representatives. You look at the representatives, there's a reason we have 100 senators, because we have 50 states, full states. Puerto Rico, D.C., they are not states. U.S. Virgin Islands, not a state. None of the rest of these are states. They do not have representatives in federal government. They are managed by the federal government. So you could argue the U.S. is not yet fully a representative democracy because not all of its citizens have representation. Even ones who have committed no crime, have done nothing wrong, just where they happen to be born, means that they do not have a representative in Congress. This link here, no representation, goes into the struggle, I believe, for DC statehood, if I'm not mistaken. But it talks about these different struggles because, especially places like Puerto Rico, they really want, many people, I think it's somewhere around half of the people, would like it to become its own state and have representation. Ooh, some more comments here. Let's take a look. So you're saying, Crystal, that by your estimation, we are a representative country. So they should be able to vote. Here's the kicker. All of these territories I mentioned, they can vote for president. And that's it. So I guess it's a little bit of an overstatement to say they have no representation. They are technically represented by a president, but that's it. They have no Congress people. There's no Puerto Rican senators. There's no Northern Marianas Islands House of Representatives members. They don't get any say in federal government, except for they get to vote for president. But altogether, it's not a huge population either. So I'm not even sure. Wait a minute. Do they eat? Well, now hold on a second. I said they vote for president, but I don't remember that being part of the Electoral College. I may have been mistaken on that. I may have said something that's incorrect. My mistake. My mistake. American territories cannot legally vote for president either. So my original statement stands. They have no representation. Sorry about that. Let me put a link to that because I want to make sure that I get that right. So we have University of Chicago Legal Forum, Silent Citizens, United States Territory Residents, and the right to vote for presidential elections. Maybe it's just the primaries that they're allowed to vote. I don't even know if that's true at this point, though. I'm questioning that now, too. Let's put that link in the chat. So if you're seeing the chat wherever, yeah, travesty, I would say. I would say you're right. Spot on. Now, if you want to dig even further, start asking yourself why these particular places are not allowed to have representation. It's a good question, right? I would say a good place to maybe start getting some answers is to look at demographic information for these various places. Might give you a sense of why they have systemically been not allowed to vote. Another fun fact. Did you know that the Philippines used to be a U.S. territory? It absolutely was. We managed it for a while. And then was it World War II when we finally, I think it was World War II when we finally lost it. There's a great book out there. I'm gonna take a little tangent. I've been pretty good about not doing tangents so far, so I feel that I'm able to do this one. It's called How to Hide an Empire. I'll just post a review for it somewhere. Columbia University, How to Hide an Empire. Fantastic book that goes into the history of all the U.S. territories. Because as Americans, we don't think of ourselves as an imperial state or imperial country, right? We give rights to all our people. We're not spread out around the world like the British Empire was. We're different, right? A little different. Well, this book puts things into a different perspective. How to Hide an Empire. And they will go into the history of places like the Philippines and how we won and lost them as territories. And whether or not they were better or worse off. That's a good one, though. Color? What are you asking there about color? Which color are we asking about? Anyway, moving on. So yeah, you can make the argument pretty convincingly that since all of our citizens do not have representation, oh, you have to read it. Okay. Yeah, and again, you can always look at the live playback of this video, even when it's done. Look at the live playback. All the comments should show back up. I don't know if the links will be hyperlinked still. You may have to copy and paste, but that's something you can find out at the time. But if you ever want to come back and look at the transcript of this, or I guess it's just the live replay of the comments, it will show up. DC has 3 for the Electoral College, the 23rd Amendment. Thank you for that. Okay, so that's just for the Electoral College, though. So I guess DC does get to vote on the president because, again, they're in that weird kind of legal limbo where they're not exactly a territory, but they're certainly not a state. But I mean, it's good they at least get to vote for president, but they still have no representatives in Congress. No voting. They do send people that go and try to negotiate with other senators and Congress people, but they're not allowed to vote. So I should make that caveat as well. Thanks for that, though, Aaron. Moving on. Again, trying to find out the answer to where does the U.S. fall on the political spectrum? Turning back to the founding of the U.S., considering that only a few elites were allowed to control and make up the entire government. You said you weren't even allowed to run for office. Obviously, if you were a slave or any number of other minorities, you were not allowed to even be in government at the time. I might say that oligarchy. That's the label I'm going to suggest as more fitting for, at the very least, the early U.S., at least until we get rid of slavery. I would argue even further than that. I would argue that maybe there's a little bit of oligarchy still alive and well today. And that's what this video from Robert Reich goes into. He's an economist. He's very famous U.S. economist, talking about what is an oligarchy and does the U.S. fit the criteria for oligarchy? Today, we're talking about today with this video. Defining the oligarchy, or what oligarchy is. It means rule by the few. That's literally what it translates to. We have archy, that's always rulership. So this is the end part of the word to things like anarchy, hierarchy. Archy means ruler. Oligarchy means rule by the few, often the wealthiest elites, but it can also be powerful members of the military, the dominant religion. Oligarchy can take many forms, and I have a bunch of links to further explore each of these places, these specific examples, and types of oligarchies. From countries where the wealthy control politicians, but people still technically can vote. It may just not mean as much, such as the U.S. during the Gilded Age. So at that time, people had very little rights, very little ability to organize. And basically there was machine politics in every major city where they would just run the people that they wanted, no matter what. Oh, you want to hop on? You can. I would have to send you an invite from Restream. So if you're all right with that, Dan, I'll send that over to you. I only got a half hour left, though. I do warn you as well. Let's see. All right, I'll send you an invite. It'll be up to you whether or not you want to pursue it. I know we've had a lot of trouble in the past with that working out, but I'll send you an invite nonetheless. All right. All right, see if that works out for you, Dan. Happy to have you join. All right, moving on. So the Gilded Age. This was a time between Reconstruction and I believe I want to call it the Progressive Era. I'd be mixing up my time frames, but this was the time of the robber barons, Andrew Carnegie and his ilk, where monopolies reigned supreme. They basically bought and sold politicians, sometimes outright. Politicians would offer things like, positions in government if your union supported them, or your beer hall, or not beer hall, but like the Kiwanis Club or whatever social organization there was. There's a lot more social organizations at that time. But if they supported you, they might offer your high-ranking members positions, and it wasn't until that was outlawed that they continued on with it. There's a lot of ballot stuffing. There's the famous story of the death of Edgar Allan Poe, where he was found in women's clothing, probably overdosed from, I don't remember if it was drugs or alcohol, but the leading theory was that he had been put in a variety of different outfits. He'd been basically mugged off the street, put in a variety of outfits, and went to and made to go vote for the candidate to whoever mugged him time and time and time again, because there was not a lot of way to check on that in those days. So yeah, check out that. I don't have a link to that or anything, but go for it. Backstage. I'm not seeing you back. Oh, there you are. It's in a different spot now. Hey, Dan. How's it?
That works.
Oh, I got to put my headphones in then. 1 second. I didn't have any music going or anything, so I didn't have my headphones in. Take that again.
So what's your source with this definition of oligarchy here?
That it's ruled by the few?
Well, where's this coming? Where's the source? Because it's also saying that socialist parties are also oligarchies.
Okay. So that's a different one. That was from cnx.org. So that was just an infographic I found. Yeah. I wanted to be a little bit fair about it and include a lot of different opinions. It may not be the opinion that I share, but there are some who would put, say, China as an oligarch. Like I say in this point here, socialist regimes where a single party controls a large portion of the government, such as some would say present-day China, depends on how much you believe in the democratic process in China and how much power representatives actually have. But some would say that China would fall into an oligarch. It's a closed-off section of elites who end up making the decisions.
Well, we can sort of dig deeper in that. If you're going to use rule by the few and not rule by the rich, then all governments are ruled by the few, because there will be, by definition, fewer people governing than those than being governed.
I see what you're saying.
Unless it's pure direct democracy.
Right.
But even then, there will be a tyranny of the active, those who go to the meetings.
Indeed.
Everyone can be free to go to the meetings. Some people could be more empowered, or everyone is equally empowered.
Right. I just wanted to make sure, because again, I'm trying to be honest and trying to include more opinions than just my own. So that there would some who would say that China, the Chinese Communist Party, functions as a closed-off group. There's still some permeability to it. Like, I'm sure the average Chinese person, if they really worked hard at it, could get into a position of power in Chinese Communist Party, but how much power is open to average people, I guess, is still somewhat up for debate. That's not to say it's even necessarily a bad thing, just that it could, by some definitions, fit oligarchy. Because I know that I struggled a lot with oligarchy and what exactly to term this section, because there's not a lot of good words for it. Because I wouldn't say autocracy. It's not just the rule of one person. I wouldn't say necessarily aristocracy. That's a particular type of oligarchy, but that is closed off by heredity for the most part. So I struggled with what to term this section. So oligarchy is what I landed on, even though it's usually a pejorative or derogatory term. That's the best one that I could settle on.
Wasn't there? I saw some dominant religion. So that would be theocracy.
Yeah,
religious order is the government.
Absolutely.
I think there's a word hierarchy, which is like a government based on theft. So, like, if the government is like a gang and their main purpose is rule through intimidation and they steal a lot, or in a way that is not just taxes, if you consider taxation theft. But like steal through other means or are like operate like an organized crime ring,
right?
In a way more so then if you're a type of activist, like, yeah, of course the government is like an organized gang.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to capture mainly the idea that it's people in power who or elites of one kind or another who basically, for the most part, close things off from everyone else. It's very difficult, not impossible. We're not talking about a monarchy here, where it's all hereditary for the most part. There are ways to move your way up, but it's going to be few and far between, and there's going to be less and less positions the higher you go.
Well, then you get conflicts like old versus new money.
Sure.
Tech sector versus energy sector. And it's sort of, I think, one caveat of why the U.S. wasn't, at least liberals wouldn't consider America to be an oligarchy, because we have two parties. We have a wealthy class.
We have free fair elections. Yeah.
Yes.
And by most accounts, we do have pretty free and fair elections. There's definitely some limitations. We talked earlier about how in most states felons cannot vote, or at least at the very least people in prison. And of course, overseas territories are not allowed to vote on much of anything. But yeah, as near as I can tell, our elections are not completely stolen, at least in the internal workings. Now, you might argue that functionally, because of so much money in politics, that they are bought and paid for, and the outcome is at the very least heavily weighed upon by the money that's poured onto one side or another. That's definitely a fair assessment, and that could be why many people would put the U.S. in that realm of oligarchy.
One can use the phrase "managed democracy."
Managed democracy. That's another good word for it too.
I like that one. And certain political machines would sort of act as a balance to the rich. Sometimes they were strongest when they had the support of the rich or the wealthiest, but they didn't always need it, or at least it was a way. They acted like a workers' union in a way where they were, especially when Democrats working as when they were considered the workers' party. It's because workers, you would have these blue collar schlubs running the local government in very incompetent ways, but they were powerful because they had the support of blue collar workers and the unions and so on.
For sure.
And they didn't. They did what was sort of best for their constituents, while they were, of course, skimming off the top. But hey, it's sort
of. They definitely had to throw them a few bones in order to still get the support of the constituency.
Skimming off the top is basically how workers survive in capitalism, unless they're going to take a revolutionary stance. But political machines are not. Like, even if they're, I need to go in. Yeah, it was sort of a less conscious way of operating politically.
For sure. Just to finish out the bullet points here. So there's military dictatorships, such as that of Augusto Pinochet in Chile. Good to look into that history. There's a hyperlink right there about his rule, how he got to power, and so forth. And then the final point, fascism, where government and business conspire to amass their own power and basically suppress everybody else, such as in Italy under Mussolini. And of course, we all know the other famous examples of that. Moving on. So now comparing the hierarchies of monarchy to oligarchy. So some of the characteristics of oligarchy include limited social and economic mobility. There may be no laws stopping you from becoming one of the elites, but gaining the resources to do so might be beyond most people's abilities. Limited government controls by non-elites and limited rights. Maybe some voting, but government largely made up of and controlled by these same elites, whatever they may be. Less individual power for elites than in a monarchy. You don't have absolute rule. There still is the pretense of law at the very least. More collective rights. for non-elites than in monarchy, and much less hierarchy. So we've gone from a very multi-tiered system down to just basically two classes, the ruling class and the working class. And at this point in oligarchy, that's a pretty fairly impenetrable barrier.
It's also not very descriptive of our current situation, which might mean that terms like oligarchy, which were created thousands of years ago, may not be the best language for us today.
Yeah.
As capitalism evolves.
Sure. Yeah, I accept that. All right, moving back to our political spectrum here.
Ooh.
So this is how I've delineated things. I feel that this is, rather than having like the political compass or a three-dimensional thing, this seems to be a pretty solid way to put anything on just a one continuous spectrum. So we have to the far right monarchy. Now we're up into oligarchy, and at the bottom we have a capitalist system, and it is replaced feudalism and slavery as the dominant form of economy. We're always talking about dominant forms. There's always going to be remnants of the past. Today, there are landlords who make their money much in the same way that lords of the past did. And there's also legalized slavery under the Constitution for certain prisoners in certain states. So it's never completely one thing or another. Important to point out.
Correct, because it's best to kind of think of it as layers on top of each other.
Sure.
You have landlords collecting rents or rentiers, but above them are an investor class investing in their rent collection.
Indeed.
The rent collecting alone is not the top of the pyramid. In fact,
Right.
it's simply it's actually the economic base for the next layer above.
Indeed, and that's why I put capitalism still firmly in the dominant economic form, even though there are these others kind of at the lower tiers on the economic.
And another concept is the kind of driving force of history, that line where between you have this overlap between monarchy and capitalism.
Yeah.
It's that at a certain point in the 17th, 18th century, you still have all these monarchies, but the driving force of history becomes capital, and monarchs simply they have to actually follow it.
Indeed.
Retain.
Yep, and we've already covered the sort of proto-capitalism of mercantilism.
Yes, I'm sorry for missing most of the lecture, teacher.
That's okay. But so we're going right to, because it lines up fairly well with history. We're going right to left in terms of our political spectrum. All right. So the pros and cons, and again, these are not all pros that I necessarily think are true or cons that I necessarily think are true. These are just some general ideas that people tend to gravitate around. So in theory, society is ruled by the most educated, the innovative, the capable, the hardworking people. More or less, you could call this a meritocracy. That's a word that's been floating around lately. You're really good at something, well, then of course you're going to do better at your job. You're going to move up. Eventually, you'll be head of the company. That's the thinking anyway. It doesn't necessarily work in practice. Quick decision making.
Yeah, in theory.
Of course.
On paper.
Yes.
But in practice, human nature is to be a lazy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, funny how that works, huh? Quick decision making, and this is again compared to some of the stuff we will see to the left. Just less people making a decision usually takes less time. There's less interest to consider, less levers of power to throw. You get quicker decision making than in a more democratic form. Small amount of social and economic mobility. Not a great amount, but there's not necessarily anything legally holding you back. You're not born a peasant and you're never going to rise above your station. Not as much hereditary consideration as monarchy, and much more tech innovation than under monarchy. With more people contributing more ideas, it just tends to be that more innovation happens.
What source? What
I don't have a particular source for that.
Yeah.
But
there's all kinds of books that attribute what forces social, political contribute to being more innovative. But I think the issue is thinking that innovation is some kind of good in itself.
sure.
Not to sound conservative, like, well, we don't need to innovate for innovation's sake. But as far as, I guess, capitalist superstructure goes, it's like there is innovation for innovation's sake. Or saying you're being innovative, like the 16th iPhone.
Sure, but just repackaging something old. That's true as well.
Or the innovation in fruit packaging.
I'm just saying for the people that are real big, we got to be ruled by our betters sorts of people.
Yes,
that's going to be something that they bring up. Okay. That's going to be the sort of thing that they bring up as a pro. The cons, not elites, have little power. There's, even though there's nothing necessarily holding you back legally, you're probably not going to accumulate a lot of wealth in your lifetime in order to move up. The very few are lucky enough to do that. Being wealthy / having military might does not always equal being a good ruler. That should be pretty, that should make a lot of sense. Just because you manage to be really good at being ruthless and shooting or stepping on the heads of your coworkers to get to the top, however you got there, doesn't mean that you're going to make good decisions for everybody once you get there. So incompetent leaders are therefore hard to remove. In the case of, say, military dictatorship, pretty much usually takes a huge economic crisis or a revolution to cede power.
Not to mention that the few will legislate so that there are legal barriers.
Indeed, yeah. They stack the deck, or they at least have the ability to stack the deck for everyone who is not them. Greed can harm people and planet. Also pretty straightforward. Just because it's good for your wallet and your bottom line or your short-term profit doesn't mean it's going to be good for everybody in the long run. Human rights are often trampled. Basically, there's a lot of post hoc, that's after the fact rationalization of why some people have the power they do and some do not. And those that do not are usually suppressed because they're assumed to not deserve it for whatever rationale they've come up with. Not as much social and economic mobility as with democracy, with a more representative democracy. Going back to that Pew Research poll, which was the best source I could find for support. There's no one who really says I would like to live under an oligarchy. It's still pretty much a derogatory word in most people's minds for good reason. But 49% would support a technocracy ruled by the experts over a democracy. Now, how you would determine who the experts were and how you would determine when there was a bad so-called expert and remove them, I don't know, but that's just what the poll found. 26% would support an autocracy, a dictatorship over a democracy. That's, to my mind, that's a pretty worrying statistic. People just want someone who's strong, perhaps, that they can follow, and just hope that person being in a better position than them will guide the country in the right direction. And 15% somehow would support a military rule over democracy. So there's the source right there. So you can go look for yourself. Oh, did you have a question or an interjection?
Just in principle, technocracy can also be considered. I think when people are saying they support that half of Americans are polled, they're thinking probably the most educated, ruled by educated.
Yeah.
Since the liberal project, including ours, is to educate everyone as fully as possible as far as they can go, or would want to go, then, it's not so much a matter of creating barriers, but otherwise it is a big question of who counts as an expert. But I I think
Indeed.
people are also thinking of that as a type of meritocracy. Well, if you're educated, you have more merit. And if you're going to use some standard of merit, level of education is probably what most people find to be a default fair metric to use. Others will use amount of money in your bank account or kill count. Sorry, not kill count. Body, number of sexual partners or
Number of Bugattis that you have.
Bugattis, yes,
Bugatti.
or whatever standards
Sure.
people.
Yeah. So that's right. So it's harder to really know what's in people's mind when they say that they want to be ruled by experts. And also, just because someone is an expert in a field, someone could be, a world-class PhD in, say, marine biology. That doesn't mean they know policy very well or how to actually maneuver things in a positive direction to have the effects that they would like to see. And if they're an expert, maybe they're an expert just in one field and they'd be utterly miserable at making decisions for another field. So there's that to consider as well. I think that's probably going to be where we're going to leave it tonight. We'll just kind of do the wrap up here. So what comes after oligarchy? In theory, because of the rise of the capitalist class, heredity no longer becomes relevant, I should say, as relevant. You can still inherit businesses from your parents, which happens all the time. More people are able to rise and become wealthy. Technological development accelerates. Society as a whole becomes better off. The working class fights for and wins rights such as voting rights because they now have the ability to do so with their increased wealth. And eventually, everyone has a voice in government and representation. Now, this is in theory, of course. Doesn't necessarily mean that's how it goes. So when we have rule of, for, and actually by the people, we call that what we will talk about next time when we come back. So the bonus question. And remember, I've written this for high school students. This is something I've put in my class. With so much money in politics these days, do you think we still live in a representative democracy, or have we slipped back into oligarchy? Why or why not? So that is the final question for tonight.
I would say we never left, but
I might say that as well, but I'm trying to get people to just start thinking. This is definitely political spectrum 101. I have a lot of links to things, but we're not doing super deep dives.
I think you're doing a good job.
I appreciate it.
We'll see how it goes with the actual students.
I've gotten this far with the students, and so far they've been doing pretty well to follow along. And most of my students did come to the conclusion that yes, we do live in an oligarchy.
One of my not radicalizing moments, but epiphany moments or rather disillusion. Like one of the many ways you can become disillusioned with the usual narratives of meritocracy and democracy in America is kind of looking at just my own position and those around me, the businesses around me, the way my city has been run, and just how much it is based on family connection.
Indeed, that was a big moment for me too.
Who matters, even in getting hired in the labor market. It matters who you know. References can be built, but when you start out, your only references are your family or something like that, or your first job. How do you get your first job? It has to be some family connection. There's just no other way. Or my father, my first technically first job was this temporary thing where my dad kind of talked to the neighbor in the retail establishment next door and asked like, hey, could you use some help? My son needs to work. It was a teenage job. It doesn't feel like a real job. I was just kind of counting inventory for one of those sort of kind of a scam operation, but not technically a scam, but like, I guess, I would say it was the like going to Christian farmers markets and selling wooden objects from the Holy Land, but I was like putting the stickers on saying it was made in Bethlehem.
Okay.
There's no fucking way all this wood tchotchkes came from Bethlehem. And crucifixes. But
Wow.
it was an odd guy. He was a Palestinian who was Christian, and he married a Canadian. Really kooky guy, and he would kind of
That's
make
funny.
these. He needed a way station in New York for tax reasons on his way down to the South to sell these wooden tchotchkes. And the part of the job was filling up his van with as much merchandise as possible. And he had an engineering degree, and yeah.
Yeah,
But
interesting.
yeah.
But yeah,
So,
so from that you determine that, it's kind of who you know. You have
yeah,
to
and
know
then
some
and then
people.
he must have been in trouble because he disappeared by the third.
Oh my.
Yeah,
Okay. So yeah, real real scam artist, huh?
something
Um
like that.
I have a similar story to that. It's kind of the inverse of that. There's been plenty of times in my life where uh I've been like just above the poverty line, and like something comes up, I get a bill or something like that, or overshoot rent somehow, and I have to rely on parents to bail me out. And it would give me pause to be like, well, you know, each one of these times, if I didn't have a network of people to support me, if I just, if everyone was in the same position as me, no one was around, no one was able to lift me back up, I would have been homeless. There's been several times that in my life that have been that way. So yeah, the idea that it's all just working hard and shaking enough hands is a bit ridiculous. So
When I
just
run
imagine
for
that.
office, I gotta shake some hands.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact,
Uh,
tomorrow my manager is like, oh, because he's been organizing the shovel brigades. This is an org called Love Your Block, and
oh,
they're
cool.
doing some show shuffling in the hood. So we may join that tomorrow. Um, on another note, I just interviewed for the Office of Cannabis Management in New York.
Hey, cool.
Their
Congrats.
purchasing unit. It's a simple office drudgery,
Fingers
but
crossed.
yeah, I ran into she made the point to come down to fetch me. Someone I went to high school with. She was part of fittingly, she was part of the pothead clique.
Ah,
I did not crack that while catching up with her, but that she did change her hair color. She went between pink and green hair in high school. She had either her natural hair color or it was dyed black. I don't know. But I was like, oh yeah, yeah, I do remember that. So yeah, it was fun,
that's funny.
and still fun.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you could join for this tail end here. I do have to get going because it's about that time. But
Mm-hmm.
if you would like to continue this on next Tuesday, I'd be happy to pick up
Sure.
where we left off. Let's see where we are at in terms of our slides.
How many parts do you have?
I have 7 parts, including the ending. So next part is part 4, talking about representative democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just close. So we're just about at the halfway point. We're about
The
55
worst form of
slides.
government, except for everything else.
Right. Yes, we'll be doing a lot of quotes from The West Wing. So, no, I'm just kidding. I don't use
Just
The
the
West
West
Wing at all.
Wing? Yeah, I know. More like the West Wing quoted everybody else.
All right. Oh, but Aaron Sorkin's just so brilliant. How can?
AKA Sorkin has never had an original thought.
Oh, come on. He does like the same really honest, hard hitting dialogue in every show he's ever made. But it's a different speech each time. It's just the same effect.
Just think, well, I know I could just get really mad about like his Chicago 7 movie and any other time he wants to depict actual politics.
Yeah.
But otherwise, people love the fictional politics that he,
Sure.
the walking talk.
Right. Yeah. It's the president we wish we had, the president we deserve, the president
I
we.
was sort of confused actually as a kid with West Wing because I was actually sort of young enough or confused enough to think like, wait, is this depicting a real president? This isn't.
Yeah, I was like, this kind of feels
and,
real.
and then it was like his replacement was like a Latino woman, and I'm like, huh?
Well, this is clearly fiction now. Yeah.
Yes, I was like, huh. But I was like 10
Sure.
middle school
Yep.
or something.
Yeah, it does have that patina of something really important and influential. It just once you know anything about it.
On the Obama administration, I mean, everyone there loved it. So
Oh my
did.
God,
Like
it's like their favorite.
they had a cultural impact on them the same
Yeah.
way that like All in the Family seemed to affect a lot of Gen Xers.
For sure.
And how they think about relational politics, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Just the whole like everybody's kind of right, but so there's no use fighting with people.
Yeah. So it's all about love and getting together in the end. And yeah.
We're being above politics. All right, good night.
I really do got to go. You have a good night, and I'll see you next time. Alrighty, that was Dan Platt joining for the last bit there. Thank you everyone who's joined. Like I said, I did not have the comment section up, so I just wanted to shout out one more from Crystal here, who says that she finds the slides amazing, learning so much, realize so many things. Thanks so much, Zach. Thank you so much, Crystal. I appreciate your words here. I really appreciate you sticking along till the end as well. And all the contributions you made and everybody else has made to the stream. It's really been an enjoyable one. Nice to get back more into the political theory of things, as much as I like gaming and so forth. Good to have a little bit, a treat and an actual hearty meal once in a while. So we may pick this up next Tuesday. Seems like Dan was pretty into it, so I'm hoping he'll be open to it again. We may put it off till the following Tuesday, but stay tuned. And again, you can go to any of the places that you have seen this posted. There will be a video recording. So wherever you're watching this now, you can find a video recording of it saved. And you can always go to my YouTube channel. I'm going to link that one more time here. And check all of my past broadcasts. That's really where I keep my archives of all my live streams. You want to click on the live tab. I don't have nearly as many pre-recorded videos, but there's some good ones in there too. But mostly just check out the live streams. That's where most of the stuff happens. I like to do things live. I like to have an audience. Keeps it, I don't know, keeps it more real in some ways. A little less polished, a little more off the cuff. And that's kind of how I like it. Anyway, we will see you all next time. Probably the very next stream will be this Sunday. I'm planning on doing some more Witcher 3 playthrough just because I've been enjoying it so much. It's been a nice refuge from the just constant deluge of American politics lately. So yeah, look forward to more of that if that's something you're into. And those streams too are always open to chat. It's a very casual deal. You want to stop by and talk about whatever's on your mind, good or bad, heavy or light, whatever you feel like. Always welcome on those streams as well. So just more for fun and open. But hope to